Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. Incumbents with many clear advantages usually win re-election, but this week's primary saw some upsets. In Columbus, Kristen Brown lost by a wide margin to Jim Lienhoop.
Again, thanks for your nomination as the Republican candidate for mayor. We'll take a breather over the summer and then wait to see how the November election sets up.
And Martinsville's longtime mayor, Phil Deckard, won't be on the ballot in November. Plus, there will be some new faces filling the top positions in some other cities where incumbents decided not to run, like in Bloomington.
We had a good campaign. I think it was a spirited campaign, talking about a lot of issues in the city. It's nice to prevail.
A complete election recap coming up. Plus, we take a road trip in our Hidden Places series. Come along for our journey that takes us high onto the roof of the West Baden Resort. The journey isn't for the faint of heart, but what's hidden underneath the dome is well worth the trek. We'll show you. Those stories plus the latest news headlines from across the state right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. This week's primary election was marked by some major upsets. Incumbents are often tough to defeat, but several lost their seats to challengers. Others narrowly retained their positions. As Barbara Harrington reports, that could make for another tough battle during the general election.
There were no long lines at Monroe County polling sites this week because there weren't many voters. Election workers spent most of their time reading books as a small number of people trickled in every hour.
I was very interested in the mayoral election in Bloomington, and I also feel like complacency is a problem in the state of Indiana and wanted to do my part.
Turnout didn't even hit the double digits in Monroe County. The county clerk's office reported only 5.5% of eligible voters cast ballots in this week's primary. That made for some extremely close races.
Come on in and have something to eat.
What was expected to be a tight race for Bloomington Mayor Mark Kruzan's seat wasn't as close as many expected. Kruzan isn't seeking re-election, and that left Darrell Neer and John Hamilton to vie for the city's top position. Hamilton won with 58% of the vote after focusing his campaign on preserving Bloomington's character.
I want to thank Darrell Neer and John Lindenmeyer and all the candidates because I deeply believe our party is stronger because of these kind of debates, discussions, competition. It makes us all better. It makes us talk about the city, where we're going.
Councilman Darrell Neer spent the night surrounded by family and friends at Grazie and was disappointed by the loss.
I congratulated him on a win. It was a hard-fought primary, and I was proud to be a part of it. And I let him know that what I told our supporters is that we're all Democrats, and we line up together.
Bloomington's District 4 council race ended up being the biggest nail-biter of the night, with incumbent Dave Rollo winning over Philippa Guthrie by only 85 votes. The debate over how to best control Bloomington's deer population played a large role in the tight race. Rollo voted for a controversial deer kill at Griffey Lake Nature Preserve last year.
It was unavoidable, but I don't think it needs to divide the community, because I think that we can work together to resolve it. I think that everyone's in favor of welfare of both humans and the deer, and so we need to come together and solve that problem.
He admits his narrow victory shows he has some work to do, and not all voters are happy with his decisions. And it appears voters in the city's District 3 weren't too happy with Councilman Marty Speckler. Newcomer Allison Chopra defeated him with 67% of the vote.
There's, not one person in my generation on the city council, and I think someone needs to do it, and I'm willing to do that.
Incumbents were also defeated in mayoral races across the region. Columbus Councilman Jim Lienhoop beat first-term Mayor Kristen Brown with 64% of the vote in the Republican primary.
Just as happy as we are with the outcome of this election, we need to realize that there are others in our community who supported Mayor Brown and who didn't get the answer they were looking for. Tomorrow, please help our campaign one more time. Reach out to those who voted otherwise. Ask them to continue to be involved. This is their community too, and it needs to work for all of us.
A council member in Martinsville also beat out an incumbent in the mayoral primary. Shannon Cole took the majority of the vote over longtime Mayor Phil Deckard.
I think people were ready for a change. I think they saw an opportunity for some things to go a different direction in Martinsville and move forward, and I think they were just ready.
In the Circle City, where Mayor Greg Ballard is not seeking a third term, former U.S. Attorney Joe Hogsett easily won the Democratic primary and will face off against the Republican primary winner, restaurant owner Chuck Brewer. Indiana University political science professor Marjorie Hershey is here to provide us some additional analysis on how this week's elections fit into larger political trends. As Barbara Harrington mentioned, a lot of the voter turnout was in single digit. Marion County's second lowest turnout, 27 years, with just 7% of registered voters going to the polls. Was that to be expected, though?
Yes, very low turnouts exist in primaries all over the country. First of all, because most other nations don't have primaries. We have to vote twice in order to get elected officials, and when you ask people to do the same job twice, fewer of them are willing to do it in the lesser of the two elections. In addition to that, the problem with turnout in the primary is that although most of us claim to vote for the person and not for the party, that's not accurate. Most of us vote for the party, and that's increasingly true. And there's no difference in party in the primary. They're all Republicans or they're all Democrats, and so that cue that gives us a shortcut to make a decision between the candidates is not present in a primary. And in addition, most other democracies don't require people to register first before voting. We do. And that was what brought the voter turnouts 100 years ago down from about 80% down to about 55 or 60%. So there are a lot of structural reasons why very few people come out and vote in primaries.
In some cities like Bloomington, it tends to be a more democratic area. So would that influence too the amount of people that you think then they would come? Because this past election could be who determines who's mayor of Bloomington.
Yeah, well, in fact, I suspect it did. The trouble is that most of us just aren't that interested in politics. We're not going to take that much time to make the decision, and particularly when the two candidates don't have major differences between them, then it becomes more difficult for people to convince themselves they ought to try to search out the differences that exist.
And then there's all the city and county races too, which are different, and I assume that takes into effect the amount of people who vote too. So thank you very much for being here today. And now for headlines, we go over to Alex Dirkman, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thank you, Joe. A new HIV and AIDS clinic is opening in a small town at the center of the state's HIV outbreak. The clinic is part of a new partnership between the city of Austin and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. In addition to free HIV testing, the clinic will offer medication and help connect people with treatment. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation has dealt with several outbreaks before, but never one that's involved IV drug use in a rural area.
This is a new phenomenon that even the HIV and AIDS community has to catch up to. And if you look at our history of how we do HIV and AIDS care, it's been based in cities and urban environments and not rural areas. So that is a different piece of this. And I think this is a great lesson for not only Indiana, it's for the country.
The State Department of Health says the HIV outbreak is slowing down with 150 positive cases in the region. They also report at least one person has AIDS. The city of Austin is already asking the state for permission to establish a year-long needle exchange under recently passed legislation. FEMA is reinstating more than $6 million in hazard mitigation grants to Indiana. The federal agency suspended them earlier this year because it said Kokomo had misused some of the funds. The city of Kokomo used the grants to buy a half-dozen parcels of land where it's building a baseball complex. FEMA argues the land should have been kept as green spaces. FEMA and Kokomo are still in a legal battle, but FEMA did approve the city's plan earlier this week to put turf on the field. That means the city's new baseball team will be able to hold their home opener at the stadium later this month. State education leaders have been crafting a new school accountability system over the past 2.5 years. And Thursday, the State Board of Education approved a final framework. The new system gives equal weight to student growth and performance. Previously, grades were primarily calculated on student performance on the statewide standardized ISEP test. Experts say this new method will likely result in fewer A and F schools. The approved rule now goes to the Attorney General for technical approval, then to the governor for his signature. And the National Football League announced Wednesday the results of its independent investigation into whether footballs used in a January game between the New England Patriots and the Indianapolis Colts were tampered with. The nearly 250-page report found it was more probable than not that two people, the Patriots equipment assistant John Jastrzebski and officials locker room attendant Jim McNally, participated in a deliberate effort to release air from Patriots game balls after the balls were examined by the referee. The report says it's more probable than not Patriots quarterback Tom Brady was aware of the tampering, but other team personnel were not aware. Hoosiers enrolled in the Healthy Indiana Plan program will now have access to job training, among other resources. About 300,000 people enrolled in HIP 2.0 will soon receive letters inviting them to participate in Gateway to Work, a program run by the state's Family and Social Services Administration, which will offer resume reviews, specialized job training, and even financial assistance for transportation and clothing for job interviews. Half the money from the program will come from existing state cigarette taxes. And the Grissom Air Museum is receiving $150,000 more from the state over the next 2 years. As Gretchen Frazee reports, the money will be used in part to restore military planes to their former glory.
The 24 or so military planes housed at the Grissom Air Museum have countless stories to tell of World War II veterans, battles in Vietnam, and raids during Desert Storm.
This is a KC-97. This was the first tanker brought to the base in the late 50s. Basically, we became, during the Cold War, a fighter aircraft base, a bomber aircraft base, and a tanker base, all in kind of one.
Needless to say, newer models have replaced nearly all of these planes, and it's Jim Price's job to make sure the older ones don't fall into disrepair. But that costs money, something he doesn't have a lot of. The museum makes some money off admissions, souvenirs, and donations, and Price is always trying to host events with veterans who used to fly the planes.
It's a TF-102 that President George W. Bush trained on when he was with the Texas Air Guard. And again, if the president, I know he's built a library and now he's probably doing other things, we really would appreciate it, Mr. President, if you would just come and visit us at the museum. We could do like a book signing, get pictures of you in the cockpit and stuff, a little bit of reminiscing.
The limited funding is why Price is grateful lawmakers are allocating another $75,000 in each of the next 2 years. He'll use that money to repaint the planes, give them anti-rust treatment, and maintain the museum grounds, all in hopes of making the museum more attractive.
Just like any history, it can either be dry toast, which a lot of history books can be, or you can have a living history, which is what we're trying to be.
Price says in the next 5 to 10 years, he's hoping to raise more money to create videos of veterans who flew in the planes so visitors can watch and listen to their stories as they tour the facility.
And Joe Price says that Indiana has a long military history, and with many veterans growing older, he wants to make sure that their stories are preserved and not forgotten.
Good stuff. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Yes.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Have you visited the West Baden Resort and taken in this view? There's a small room at the top of the atrium, and what's inside is shrouded in mystery. We journey to the top of the dome coming up. And the powerful message behind a sculpture. It reminds us not to pretend we know the struggles another person might be facing. These stories right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
I can change the world with my own 2 hands. it a better place. With my own 2 hands, I'm gonna make it a brighter place. With my own 2 hands, I'm gonna help the human race. With my own 2 hands, I can hold you. In my own 2 hands, and I can comfort you. With my own 2 hands, with my own 2 hands.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. This week we introduce you to a new Indiana Newsdesk series we're starting called Hidden Places. It's about exploring places or things you've wondered about in Indiana but have never had the opportunity to experience. My colleague Sarah Whitmire joins us now to tee up the first installment. Sarah, I saw a little bit of this in the newsroom and you were on top of the dome at West Baden. I'm a little scared of heights. I don't think I could have done that.
It certainly was a climb. You know, most of us are familiar with West Baden, and people from around the world flock to the resort in many cases just to take in the architecture. The 200-foot domed atrium was the largest freespan dome in the world until the 1960s when the Houston Astrodome was built. Our trip shows you a side of the dome you've never seen before as we travel to a mysterious treasure high above the atrium floor.
Our journey starts here.
If you're here in the atrium of the hotel, look up. The angel room is about 100 feet above the floor in that white cylinder where all the roof trusses come together.
The only access to see the angels is to scale the top of the dome.
You start by taking an elevator up to the 7th floor. Our guide is engineer Jim Self.
There's a certain point where we need to come down facing the roof because the steps are so close. If you try, or actually you're facing the thing because the steps are so close, you need to get your foot in there.
We'll follow your lead?
Yep, that probably
Okay.
It's not exactly a ladder and not exactly steps. The rungs are close together, and because of the way they slant in, you need at least one free hand to hold on to the railing as you work your way up the roof of the dome. It levels off at the top and you can take in the view of the entire valley.
This is the very top of it. You'll actually go down a staircase in there that takes you down to where the angels were painted.
And then there they are, staring at you. As your eyes adjust, the angels begin to pop out of the steel walls and reveal themselves. The room is 16 feet wide and 10 feet high, and the angel murals stand floor to ceiling. When you look up, 3 cherubs are floating on faded clouds. When were these painted? Who painted them and why? There are no answers, but theories abound. Librarian and art history buff Carrie Schweer is among the many people who's researched the angels. The paintings are in the style of 15th and 16th century artists.
The paintings are so detailed, and even some of the aspects are so close to the aspects of the actual paintings that they had to have been, I think, painting from reproductions.
Things like the halos in the murals are similar to the details that were incorporated in Fra Angelico's altarpieces. And the cherubs on the ceiling are like Raphael's Sistine Madonna.
Even if you look really closely at the way the hands are positioned on some of the angels, even though they're not incredibly realistic, you can tell that the artist is trying to position the fingers in a similar, bend them in a similar way. I think someone probably saw these Renaissance paintings and just sort of wanted to put their own spin on it.
A popular theory is the artist modeled the faces after real people. But who?
It could be some of the family members associated with the owners of the hotel. I even wonder if maybe if these were painted by one of the individuals convalescing at the hotel.
The time frame when the angels were painted is between 1901, when the hotel was being rebuilt, and 1918, the date of the earliest recognizable graffiti on the murals.
Could artisans working on the hotel during the renovations have painted the angels? The Cassini family lived at the hotel for 2 years while they worked to lay 12 million pieces of tile on the atrium floor. There are similarities between early family photos and the angel faces, the rounded hairstyles and dark eyes in particular. Closely examining the paintings leads to yet another possibility. Notice the headpiece on this angel. From 1918 to 1919, West Baden was an army hospital. Could the faces represent the nurses? Is the angel's headpiece actually a nurse's cap?
It's known that during that time period, military hospitals, they would have had all kinds of programs for these individuals to sort of help them rehabilitate. It's noted that some of those programs were art.
So perhaps a recovering soldier was the artist, maybe working alongside an art teacher.
I'm intrigued by the World War I angle, just and all the soldiers coming back who would have seen these horrible things overseas, and maybe one of them painting it as sort of a memorial to those who died, or because I think it's kind of interesting that this is a religious subject matter.
At the same time the soldiers were convalescing at West Baden, the circus was wintering here. Ed Ballard, who owned the hotel, was a partner in the second largest circus on the continent.
The circus certainly would have had individuals for painting banners, signage for advertising and that kind of thing. And they also had a paint shop there on location that certainly could have served the individual in charge of that paint shop certainly could have been a prime suspect.
Circus painters also knew how to paint big. The angel murals are larger than life size. Testing the paint to see if it matches what circus painters used would show whether this theory is on the right track. But time is making finding the true story behind the angels more difficult.
People's recollections alter, and especially now that we're almost 100 years from or more from the time period we're talking about. None of these people are living anymore.
And maybe that's part of the allure of these hidden angels, imagining all of the possibilities of who the artist might have been. It's a mystery you might not want to solve.
And West Baden did open the Angel Room up for tours briefly a few years back, but the story goes that their insurance company found out and said either you get insurance or you get tours, but you can't have both. Now, if you want to see the angels, there are replicas of them at a museum in Indianapolis. It's at the Irvington Historical Society, and there you can see the angels and what they looked like before they started deteriorating from age and before they were painted with all that graffiti you saw in the piece.
So interesting. Thanks a lot, Sarah. And as we continue this series, if you have a place you've always been curious about, drop us a line and maybe we'll explore it in a future segment of Hidden Places. Just send it to news@indianapublicmedia.org. The homeless not only have to deal with finding a place to sleep each night, but they often also face ridicule and discrimination. Bloomington's Shalom Community Center, along with other community members, are attempting to change these negative perceptions in a creative way. Joe Lamantia's sweatshirt is covered with grout and grime as he steps back to examine his work. Lamantia is a local artist who's working with the Shalom Community Center to create a rather large piece of artwork. Their hope is to change negative perceptions of the homeless community through art.
How do we see people differently? How do we understand that people who are homeless deserve compassion, that they deserve respect, that they deserve to be listened to and understood as opposed to demonized and hated.
The sculpture called Heart Shelter depicts a large heart filled with broken pieces of mosaic mirror.
So it conveys this sense of I am broken, but I'm held in this heart. And I think that's just such a powerful core message for what we're trying to accomplish.
Lamantia is working with a small group of people to get the project off the ground. After that, people from the community are encouraged to join the team when the project is moved to its permanent location outside the Shalom Center.
It's just one way for people in this community to show their compassion and their empathy and to lend a hand and be a brother and sister or a father and mother, just be there.
The project is expected to be complete by this summer. The Shalom Center has received grants from the City Art Commission and Bloomington Urban Enterprise Association to help fund the project, and they are about to begin an Indiegogo campaign to raise the rest of the funding. And before we go, though, we have to say thank you and goodbye to Alex Dirkman. She's been a staple here at Indiana Newsdesk and in the newsroom from the very beginning when we launched the show. And Sarah, I can remember Alex back when we had our training with students, and she was the only one taking notes vigorously. So I knew that she was going to be awesome. You have been, and we know you're going to do big and wonderful things. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. You've always been a standout, Alex, and we certainly wish you all the best. You know, Joe, we just found out this week Alex won a National Prindy Award, one of the best students in the whole country. So
that's amazing.
We're very proud of all you've accomplished.
Normally I say goodbye, you say goodbye tonight.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by the following. Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. Main Source Bank, headquartered in Greensburg, Indiana, offering products and services to fit every stage of life. More information at mainsourcebank.com. Main Source, life needs a great bank. Member FDIC and equal housing lender. And by WTIU members. Thank you.